keep it short. Actually, initially, I got a window of 20 minutes for this presentation, so it was for me really interesting to see that I end up at 45 minutes, but I'm not going to keep it that long for this presentation whatsoever. But I'm really interested into exploring this topic because I can see it as a kind of a new frontier for all of us doing research in creatine for so many years so far. So just to address something that I missed last time, according to one question I received from Mauricio, I've been contacted many times, particularly from North American companies, to really help them to develop their formulas for new creatine and creatine-related compounds, but I'm not have any stocks and shares or ownership to any company that sells or produces creatine and creatine-related compounds. Although I have a couple of patents bringing zero money so far. Today I'm going to really give you a brief introduction of why I see creatine as something that might help anybody, really different populations, from very young children up to the elderly, particularly embracing the concept of public health nutrition for creatine. I'm going to talk a bit about this creatine as a semi-essential nutrient, which appears to be, I think, quite nicely supported by recent data. I embrace this creatine malnutrition. According to NHA's data, or some other groups, including studies done by my lab, it appears that many people actually is not getting enough creatine coming from the food, and that might be related to really different health risks. What is creatine safety? We know a lot about that, and I'm looking forward really to see the Riggs Group paper, the biggest so far about the safety. But we are going also to learn a little bit about lacking good studies from populational approach regarding creatine coming from the diet, not exactly coming from the dietary supplements. This is very important. If you would like to put creatine on the map for everybody, you have to stick to the FDA, WHO criteria. So we would like to see what are the criteria coming from the regulatory authorities that we have to comply in the future. I developed in Norway creatine.global initiative that appears to try to collect people together, and I would like to invite all of you to take a look on this site and maybe to send me an email, consider joining this initiative, and I'm going to discuss that a little bit later. Many open questions, and I prepare some short information to bring back home and digest. This is interesting. This year we are going to enter the 100th year after the first paper dedicated only to humans with creatine supplemented in nice dosages back in 1926. Dr. Alfred Shanutin from University of Virginia tried to understand what's the role of creatine in the human body. And those guys were not shy. Really, they provided, if Rick is here, up to 20 grams per day to those guys back in 1920s to see is there any threshold and what is the role of creatine in the human body. So I remember from that paper they suggested creatine might be a reserve food material, not related to protein synthesis, but something that waits in the body for some unknown role. And you could see here many important people, just a few of them, and I included John Bronston, another Canadian. It appears to be a Canadian field. Huh? So many Canadians contributing critically to the research, and of course, this is Roger. I remember visiting my university for an invited lecture, and he shared my passion for Scandinavia. Specifically, we love Jan Sibelius' music, and he enjoyed a really excellent gentleman and very noble and modest person will be missed. During the past, 100 years, we can see that two different pathways provided most of the information about the research on creatine. One is definitely exercise science. I think, I don't know, maybe 90%, maybe even 95% of the whole research conducted in this area in humans are coming from the exercise science. And some of them, of course, particularly in the past 2 decades, are coming from the clinical medicine, which is also extremely important, being a medical doctor and, to recognize something that is not just a dietary supplement, but perhaps an effective and very effective therapeutics for a plethora of different conditions. Clinical medicine is important. But if we would like to go further, if we would like to offer creatine to everybody, we have to consider completely new frontier. It's a public health. Creatine for everybody. So we are not talking about the huge dosages. We are not talking about interventional period that lasts 4 weeks or 8 weeks. We are talking about creatine everywhere. So I envision a world in the next 10 years or 15 years when can you go into the grocery store and buy many different products, functional foods, enriched, fortified with creatine for everybody, because it might be the case. In Scandinavia, we faced problems with iodine deficiency for many, many years. And we effectively find a solution by fortifying food with iodine or folic acid as a very important component for pregnant woman to prepare for a pregnancy. So I think creatine might be the next nutrient that should be considered as that kind of option because of the data we collected and others as well. So, okay, creatine is beneficial for almost everybody, right? We already somehow know that, but is it really the case? I think it's not the case at this moment. We have to change the paradigm. We have to change the way of thinking. We have to translate it from this role as a kind of clinical, experimental, ergogenic potential for athletes or clinical population into something that is accessible and beneficial to the general population. So we have to really stick to the new kind of guidelines that has a final frontier to get it accepted by everybody. So much more strict regulation for the studies is required in the forthcoming years. High quality population studies. Although we have nice studies, but I'm talking about thousands of people evaluated for really prolonged period, probably with very low dosages of creatine to see is it really helpful. So the way of thinking should be different. And of course, interdisciplinary approach is very important. Okay, semi-essential nutrient. But what is amount comparable to other essential nutrients? Really, what is the minimal dosage required for everybody in different age groups and different conditions? Does general population have a deficit? Is it safe really for everyone? Particularly that life cycle nutrition before the conception, during the pregnancy, during the first 1,000 years of life might be really important to tackle in terms of creatine role in the public health, because this is the most sensible population. Okay, what is the final goal in my opinion? I can see and envision to see creatine recognized by the Food and Nutrition Board sometime in the future and enlisted in the future edition of dietary reference intakes. So we could see exactly the same information about creatine, like vitamin C or folic acid or choline or something else that is already essential. So we have to see a really nice information about recommended intakes. We don't know at this moment this for everybody, We also have to really have a nice tables, nice information about resources of creatine. If you take a look, there is plenty of food science papers, but we don't have it summarized into a document to see what is the amount of creatine across different meat sources, dairy sources and stuff like that. Creatine intake and status. We just started to collect data about that. Creatine malnutrition, I like that a lot, because I can see through NHA's data that so many people are actually not getting enough creatine, although the threshold appears to be a little bit arbitrary. What are the groups of risk for creatine in adequate intake? Creatine in health risks from excessive creatine. This is something that definitely requires additional studies, as well as interactions with medications. When I write a part on the safety creatine for elderly, I did a pretty hard part on the information, if we take a look on the data or safety, but besides the studies that included the exercise intervention, we don't have a lot of data about that. So it's really interesting that we need to think a little bit out of the box. And of course, no information, not a lot of information about the interactions with medications. We don't have that. All other essential nutrients from the dietary reference intakes have that information. So we have to prepare that. We have to collect all this data. And of course include the creatine among other important nutrients for healthful diets. Okay, let's see what is already known on this. Dr. Forbes and me prepared and published a paper some time ago in Advances in Nutrition, building a case why creatine is an essential nutrient. And you could see here 4 different groups. I'm not going to talk about the inborn errors of creatine metabolism. It is so obvious, and it's definitely strong data, at least for 2 deficiencies, that creatine might be provided by food because these people are not able to synthesize it. Kidney disease, excellent presentations. I just told Theo, these 2 presentations are, I think, extremely important for the whole community, understanding how creatine might be important in kidney disease. Vegans, okay, there are plenty of arguments, low availability from food sources, and definitely they are able to increase the endogenous production, probably not enough. But still, is there any difference between vegans, vegetarians, lacto-ovo-vegetarians, flexitarians, different types, and what is the difference between life stages? We feel there is something, but I think this population appears to be really interesting. What are the arguments to consider creatine for the general population? There is a pretty high prevalence of creatine malnutrition, and I'm going to show some data on this, and some really, really new data from the last week, actually, a couple of papers being accepted. And interesting stuff is that unfavorable health outcomes are seen in people who are consuming less creatine than suggested. But how low is too low? We don't know that yet. And of course, we don't know what are the RDAs for creatine in this moment. This paper I'm very proud of, and it has been accepted a couple of months ago in Nutrition Reviews. Actually, in my opinion, this is the first paper ever providing the recommended dietary allowances, in this case, adequate intakes for infants from 0 to 12 months, ever. There is no single, Rick probably could confirm that. So this is very interesting. I did a calculation how much creatine might be required in terms of the brain accretion and growth in this period, muscle as well on one side, and creatinine losses on another side, and also analyze the creatine content in the human milk. And it appears that kids from 0 to 6 months requires 7 milligrams of creatine per day, and a little bit more if they're older. So this is daily adequate intakes for infants, the first kind of recommendations ever for creatine for the general population. It appears that amount is approximately 10% of the total daily requirement of creatine. It might be even higher, because when we analyzed the data, and according to the strong suggestion by a reviewer of this paper, I removed the information on 3 studies that includes the data coming from India. All other studies are coming from the Western world, so it might be different according to demographics, but this is the beginning. So this is something that should be considered, and I highly really would like to thank maybe some of you who reviewed this paper for the nutritional reviews. Thank you very much for allowing me to publish this data at this moment. Okay, let's see. We suggested that it might be essential. We need, of course, much more data to confirm that. But let me focus a bit on the possibility of creatine malnutrition. According to NHANES data, it appears that in the US, this is the first in the series of paper, more than 50% of the population in that specific round do not consume recommended amount of creatine, which is arguably set in 1 gram per day. Meaning every second person does not consume enough creatine in the general population coming from the food sources. If we analyze even more data, a trend of the past 10 rounds of NHANES, including almost 90,000 participants, you're going to see a negative trend, which is really significant for kids, tended to be significant for adolescents, and also close to be significant in adults. So we are getting lower and lower creatine coming from the diet in each and every age category analyzed, suggesting that if we not try to reverse the trend, in a couple of years we are going to get even less creatine comparing to 20, 25 years ago. So there's plenty of reasons for that. I like to discuss that maybe during the question and answer session. This is a fundamental research done by the US group analyzing the NHANES from 2005 to 2012 for all the adults in these rounds. It was about 16,000 people, and it appears that the lowest quartile of creatine intake has significantly higher prevalence of depression comparing to any other quartiles, with the lowest quartile have a lowest risk of depression, more creatine, lowest risk of depression in this specific population. Depression prevalence was 42% higher in this column compared to this one. It's unbelievable, you know, and probably if you're consuming 0.7 up to 3.16 grams of creatine per day, this will significantly reduce risk of depression in this population. Of course, this is not cause effect, this is just a cross-sectional, but still, this is a very nice evidence suggesting that low creatine consumption coming from dietary sources might be risky for the general population. Dragana presented a set of data outside of the US. We analyzed the Korean NHANES database, and exactly the same results comes from the depression as well, also as some other important indices of mental health, including the suicidal thoughts, planned suicide, and suicide attempts. You could see here that again, the Q4 has the lowest prevalence of these conditions. And I hope the paper will be published anytime soon. Another set of data with NHANES analysis provide information that taking more creatine might be beneficial, coming from dietary source again, for the elderly population. This is a very nice study published a couple of years ago. Those people, elderly, 65 plus, who consume more than 1 gram of creatine every single day, they have 2.6 times, so the lower people, they have 2.6 times higher risk of Aganobacterus and 2.59 times higher risk of liver conditions. More creatine, healthier heart. More creatine, healthier liver. It's exactly the same for this similar population when we consider cognition and cognitive health. Those studies recruited tens of thousands of people. So this is, again, cross-sectional data, but still strong indicator there is a connection between low creatine intake or creatine malnutrition and impaired health. This stands for cancer as well. We did analysis comparing the prevalence of cancer according to different intakes of creatine. You could see here, only difference is in this green column. The highest, the people who consume the highest amount of creatine have the lowest incidence of cancer. And this has been replicated a few months ago by the Chinese group, exactly the same. They recruited more people with more NHANES round. So for every additional milligram of food creatine per kilo of body mass consumed daily, the cancer rate is reduced by approximately 1%. Again, cross-sectional, but extremely important, putting creatine risk of more creatine actually off the scene, because this is not true. Creatine is anti-cancerous agent, and I have some extra data to provide to confirm that. I was so happy to be embraced by Stacy and AB and also Tonje from Norway, analyzing the data for female reproductive health. This is just a summary. You could see here that in a sample of 4,500 US women older than 20 years old plus, many different conditions, including oligomenorrhea, fetal macrosmia, also pelvic infection, they are higher if you are consuming less than recommended amount of creatine. Again, suggesting that creatine malnutrition might be a real something. About the kids, this is even more convenient. We did a study analyzing the different percentiles of creatine consumption in children and adolescents in the US, and it appears the height, weight, also BMI were significantly higher in kids from the fourth quartile of creatine intake. Each additional 0.1 gram of creatine consumed per day increases height by 0.6 centimeters or 0.30 centimeters adjusted values, suggesting that creatine might be very important in supporting normal growth in children. This is even more important. Dietary creatine intake was positively correlated with head circumference in about 600 kids, very young kids, 0 to 2 years, suggesting the creatine in this very sensible period of year appears to be extremely important for normal brain development and normal brain growth, since the head circumference is a kind of surrogate marker of normal brain growth. This has been confirmed by Australian group as well. So that letter that we write together, I think, is extremely important to support that creatine is an essential nutrient, particularly for the kids. Of course, we are talking about dietary creatine at this case. And this is really, really hot stuff. This is new, first time presented ever. The data from the NHANES rounds has been compiled and merged with the CDS mortality data. And you will be really interested to learn that according to Cox regression analysis, people who are consuming more than 1 gram of creatine per day have a lower all-cause mortality, suggesting that creatine actually could extend your life, which is really, really, really important in my opinion. And you know, it's really interesting. It's very hard to outcompete socio-demographic factors such as age or social class or education and stuff like that. When we corrected the model for these factors, of course, there is no significance. But correction from diet, including the protein, including other macronutrients, and also from physical examination aspects, this remains strong. So I hope this is going to be published next week. So this is really, really a kind of glimpse on the data. But I think this difference appears to be very important. 20 years later, you know, creatine appears to keep a lower all-cause mortality if you consume it only 1 gram or plus. Is it safe for the general population? We don't really know that. We didn't find, and I'm going to show you also a couple of interesting data, we don't find any risk in cross-sectional epidemiological studies so far. Of course, there is no, at this moment, long-term populational study only on creatine without any other aspects, so prolonged, low dosage, and stuff like that. But we have over 1,000 international studies in humans so far, and we didn't find really any major side effects, even if dosages were up to almost 1 gram per kilo up to 5 years. Enrique knows a lot more than I do about this. Minor risks are weight gain due to water retention. Is it really the case? You're going to see some preliminary NHANES data. Kidney problems? Again, question mark. Maybe this is something that stands really transitional. So again, something that is either published recently or is going to be published. This is a study published a few weeks ago in Journal of Medical Nutritional Association. We found actually that for the big whole sample of enhanced participants, there is actually a negative association between the cystatin C levels and creatine intake. But I selected only the subsample of participants with kidney dysfunction. So guys who already have a kidney dysfunction. In this sample as well, there is a negative correlation. So even in people with kidney dysfunction, there is no risk of problems with kidneys if they consume a lot of creatine. And another study is also important because in this another study, we analyzed association between dietary creatine intake and different carcinogenic biomarkers from the blood. And there is no connection. Even if we corrected the models for a really different series of lifestyle, demographic, and nutritional variables. So I think this should be highly promoted that actually there is no link between dietary creatine intake and carcinogenic biomarkers, and the list of different biomarkers analyzed here is up to 12. A little glimpse on the hydration issues. This is submitted last week to Food Science and Nutrition. You could see here on this table a comparison between different biomarkers of hydration, osmolality in blood, urine-specific gravity, and also some bioimpedance analysis outcomes, such as total body water, extracellular fluid, intracellular fluid. There is no big difference between between the lowest and highest percentiles of creatine intake. It's not that simple. Getting extra creatine does not necessarily mean this is the worst thing in terms of changing the hydration. You could see that in this nice picture where only the prevalence of hyperosmolality, normal osmolality, and hyposmolality has been compared in terms of percentages between different intakes of creatine. So it's not really something that is linear. It's much more complex. So this is just a glimpse, and I like maybe to address a little bit more about this in the question and answer session, because this is still data that is not published yet. It's in the review at this moment. What appears to be most important, in my opinion, to address the public health issues of creatine? We have to comply to the regulatory authorities, such as National Academy of Medicine, if you'd like to be recognized, and included in the board, FDA, and also WHO, who has also very nice guidelines how to treat the nutrient that should be added to the nutrition of general population. There is 6 criteria. The first one, the intake of the nutrient, in this case creatine, is below the desirable level in the diets of a significant number of people. The second one, the food used to supply the nutrient is likely to be consumed in quantities that will make a significant contribution to the diet of the general population. Number 3, the addition of nutrient is not likely to create any imbalance on important other nutrients. Number 4, the nutrient is stable under proper conditions of storage and use. Number 5, physiologically available in the food. And also, number 6, there is a reasonable assurance against excessive intake to level of toxicity. Let's see what is the case for all these 6 issues for creatine. And this is in Nature Foods in the 3rd round of revision. The first one, is there a considerable risk of creatine malnutrition? Yes. I can say by enhanced data, so many people are facing not getting enough creatine. Okay, the first checked. The second one, adding creatine to different foods, dairies, breakfast cereals, yogurt, whatever. All these types of foods are widely available, and they are widespread, and this is a potential to add creatine to this specific food as a kind of functional food or food fortificant. Probably checked. Number 3, does creatine interfere with essential nutrients? Preliminary studies, including some studies conducted by people in this room, suggested that creatine probably doesn't interfere with these other essential nutrients, including the electrolytes, including the proteins, but we need better data on this whatsoever. Stability, people talking a lot about stability. So the number 3 also checked a bit. Number 4, stability. Creatine is quite stable stuff. You know, although people are talking about, you know, the degradation issues, creatine is actually, Rick prepared an excellent paper about it. Creatine is a quite stable compound. Creatine monohydrate in particular, you know. So again, this is something that could survive many months of storage, different temperatures, keeping it pretty high. Not so many transfer to creatinine. So probably checked. Bioavailability of creatine from dietary sources, excellent actually. There is a very small difference between dietary creatine coming from different food sources or creatine monohydrate as a kind of supplements, and Roger did plenty of work in this area, but this is also very nicely addressed in the Rick's paper back in 2022. And does creatine reach toxic levels? It's not easy to address this in terms of the public health because we are not talking about dietary supplements by itself. We should consider it as other nutrients. And actually, I'm very proud that Norwegian Scientific Committee on Food Safety claimed, put an opinion on the panel of different products, including creatine, back in 2016, suggested that creatine is not going to induce any excessive toxic levels so far. So this is just a kind of preliminary. It appears that many of these boxes are checked, but we need definitely a little bit better data on all these issues. That is why we started a Creatine Global initiative, and I invite you to take a look on this page as an idea to put the creatine on the map a little bit different than we used for the past 30 years, addressing this specific question: can adding creatine to the different foods that are widely consumed improve population health, but also in a climate-friendly environment? There are 6 steps that this initiative has to address in the forthcoming years. The first one, to summarize all the evidence between the creatine intake on one side and health of the populational level. The second one, this is probably the most important step, collect data about creatine dietary reference intakes across groups. We don't know that. The first one has been addressed for the infants, but many other groups require similar approach to understand how much creatine coming from the diet is required for all these groups. Number 3, what appears to be the best vehicle? Is it the milk? What kind of milk? Is it a creatine monohydrate or some other molecule? Number 4, what kind of fortification should be employed? Market-driven, public, just specific group like elderly. Number 5, strongly comply with all the regulatory issues like FDA or EFSA in Europe. And finally, number 6, monitor all this process all the time. So actually, this is a blueprint coming from the WHO, who has an excellent programs. And I like to think this approach with creatine as a kind of extension similar to folic acid back in a day or iodine many, many years ago. So the idea is to have academic board, industry board, consumer board, and a regulatory board all together connected to discuss how to put creatine for the general public. And I approached the Office of Nutritional Research to NIH. I already included a couple of guys, you know already that. Other people are also very welcome to join, particularly if they have an expertise in food science, public health, and also regulatory issues as well. Okay, plenty of open questions. I'm close to end of this presentation. Dietary reference intakes. We already know very scarce information. No ideas are determined except for this preliminary data for infants. We don't know a lot about this. Again, this should be in line with the regulatory authorities, not just collecting all the studies, but we have to comply with regulatory authorities similar to other nutrients. What are the individual requirements, including age, gender, pregnancy, lactation, and other aspects. We have to address that as well. Specific issues, we don't have, and this is not a big thing to do, detailed food composition tables. We need that to give an information to people how much creatine really is available herring prepared in Norway, in one way, cooked or fried. We need that kind of information. Epidemiology of creatine malnutrition start to appear. Some data already are there, but we need to see mild, severe malnutrition and compare it all across the world. Much more studies are required in terms of the efficacy and safety in terms of public health regulation, particularly health risks of excessive creatine. And I'm pretty confident that this is not a big deal to comply, to collect, summarize, merge all the data, and prepare it in a proper way. And this should be also considered. And I did an interesting research analyzing actually the drug data and drug data about the interaction between the drugs and nutrients. And you could see that not so many papers are available, but still you could put a creatine and see that creatine has actually some interaction with drugs. We have to highlight that, as a serious paper. How to deliver dietary creatine? Is it best to use just foods rich in creatine? Or perhaps dietary supplement? Or food fortification or functional foods? I prepared a kind of blueprint for everybody who is into public health nutrition for creatine, and this has been published some time ago in Nutritional Review. So basically, we need more information about creatine coming from dietary sources. So anybody who is in the food science should work more to provide appropriate information, how much creatine is available in different meats or different types of cooking. Only data from NHANES and some from Korea and one very small study from Brazil really provide data how much creatine people are consuming regularly, although the problems are with 24-hour recall and many, many others, but we need more data. Again, this is really interesting, and I'm so lucky, and I took a couple of pictures from the Groningen study about the biomarkers. Creatine in serum is not a regular biomarker. Not everybody is going to do that type of analysis out of nothing. Creatinine is another story, but creatine is not a big deal. You have to ask for that, and that might be a very important issue to understand something that is simple but not available enough to be included as a kind of regular analyte. So this is just a list of opportunities. We need more food chemistry studies. Creatine should be put in the list of routine analytes for many, many, many nutritional studies. Label creatine in common foods would be a really interesting option for a company in the nutrition industry to put it, okay, this food contains 1 gram of creatine. Diverse population-based studies, advanced dietary intake assessment, calculation proportion studies, validation studies for different biomarkers, and of course, more the merrier, particularly omics biomarkers would be really helpful. In the time of COVID, I think COVID started already or something like that when this paper has been published. I have plenty of time. And I write a letter to clinical nutrition. I really try to understand how to put the creatine in this new agenda in line with UN global goals. And it was really interesting that there is so many reports suggesting us to cut on meat, both on personal health and for a planetary health. But if you're going to cut the meat, you're going to get problems with several meat-specific nutrients, and creatine is one of them. So how to, get best from the both worlds? Okay, we are cutting meat, but we are adding creatine to other foods we are consuming instead of meat to keep it in a high level, because creatine can be produced by many environmental friendly processes. So probably the solution to this, to have both personal and planetary health, is to fortify food with creatine. Probably as a market-driven fortification, some convenient foods, and for some specific population, and maybe even one day recognized as a mandatory for some specific group. We need to address that, of course, and there is plenty of questions. I mentioned some of them already. So, take a home message on this. Creatine appears to be a semi-essential nutrient. We have pretty nice data, including the infants calculation data. Many populations across the world, across the age spectrum, have a low dietary intake of creatine. There is a nice solid links at this moment between dietary creatine and health from the first round of population-based studies. It's relatively safe, although more long-term studies in a populational approach are needed. This is definitely a very promising food component for public health nutrition. So I draft a kind of blueprint for everybody that is interested into dig into more for this kind of research. It's a bumpy road to the final road, definitely, final goal, but recognition of creatine one day by the Food and Nutrition Board and put it similar like choline, put it in the book would be a big thanks to our fathers and people who started the whole story, including Theo. So from creatine-rich foods and dietary supplements to food fortified with creatine, this is the road I can envision. Please consider that this is upcoming area of nutritional research and public advocacy. So I would like to just give you three calls. The first one is to step outside of the comfort zone we embraced for so many years and try to candidate creatine symposia in events that we are not appearing regularly. So to win attention of people who are not supporters in this moment. I try to do that moving from ACSM into the American Society of Nutrition. Most of these NHANE studies are published, presented in Chicago, in Orlando, in Asian meetings where people from other types of research are coming and ask me and my colleagues. They heard for the first time that creatine might be interesting from the public health nutrition approach. They are not attending exercise science symposia. So this is the first call. Consider about that. Send the proposals. Darren and me prepared for this current round of American Society of Nutrition this year, a kind of symposia on creatine for a public health approach. So this is the first one. The second one is actually a kind of appeal to embrace public health approach of creatine in your communication. When you communicate with students, when you write a paper on creatine, provide a small paragraph about creatine for the general public. Try to really improve and support this kind of agenda in your own communication, including media. And finally, I would like to invite you again to join the Creatine Global Initiative. Thank you.